Good morning. My name is Dr. Anka Sahota, and I'm Chair of the London Assembly. Thank you, Francesca Terberg and Anna Lewisden from the Jewish Music Institute. Thank you very much for this beautiful performance. And thank you for all of you joining us today for the first Holocaust Memorial Day ceremony in a new home in the Docklands. Holocaust Memorial Day is supported by the Holocaust Educational Trust and the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. It provides us a moment to remember the victims and the survivors of one of the most horrific crimes against humanity. It's also a time of learning and reflecting as we look back and remind ourselves that genocide does not happen of its own accord. It begins when we allow discrimination and hatred to go unchecked. Holocaust Memorial Day is an opportunity to ensure that future generations are aware of the history faced by so many. Today, we remember those murdered during the Holocaust, during the Nazi persecution, and the genocides which followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. The theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is ordinary people. It's particularly poignant as it highlights the fact that everyday people were involved in the Holocaust and other genocides across the world. However, we all are ordinary people who are sat here today. Ordinary people with choices. We can choose to speak up when we see discrimination. Choose to challenge hatred. Choose to ensure that genocide never happens again. And now I would like to invite the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, to give his address. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Anka, for that introduction and for your thoughtful words. I'd like to first thank Olivia Marks-Woolman and Karen Pollock from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and the Holocaust Education Trust, respectively, for the incredible work they do to educate younger generations. It's a great honour to host you here in the new City Hall for the first time to mark this most solemn occasion. For the victims, Holocaust Memorial Day is integral to ensuring the suffering they endured is never forgotten and in turn never repeated. For the survivors, like John Salter and Antoinette Mutabazi, who we'll hear from later on this morning, we can't ever really understand what they went through. But we can show that we care, that we recognize their pain, and that we stand with them. Anti-Semitism has been described as the oldest form of hatred. It did not begin with the Holocaust, nor did it end. And with anti-Jewish hate incidents hitting a record high here in the UK, there can be no doubt that the poisonous tide of anti-Semitism is rising once again. As this year's theme for Holocaust Memorial Day, Ordinary People, reminds us, it falls on every one of us to drive it back. And for as long as I'm mayor, I want you to know that City Hall will always be at the vanguard of the struggle against anti-Semitism, racism, and prejudice in all its ugly forms. The Holocaust was a depraved crime without parallel, and millions have also suffered in the sickening genocides that followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and elsewhere. In every case, words were a precursor to violence. The lesson is that we have a collective moral duty to challenge those who would scapegoat and stigmatise whole communities. Politicians and public figures must set an example by not using inflammatory or insightful language. And we must all be on our guard against those who seek to blame the other. Of course, everyone has the right to freedom of expression in our country, but with rights come responsibilities. And the growing use of dehumanising and dangerous language must be resisted. Let me end by saying this. I'd like to thank you once again for joining us this morning. Today and every day, we stand in solidarity with our Jewish community. We remember the victims and survivors of the Holocaust and of genocides, and we recommit ourselves to ensuring every human being has a fundamental right to safety, dignity, equality, and respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadiq, for your thoughts and reminding us how we need to be vigilant every day in our lives. Friends and colleagues, please welcome our next speaker, Karen Pollock, CBE, Chief Executive of the Holocaust Education Trust. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Chair of the London Assembly. Thank you, Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, for hosting this important event and for all your support. And thank you all for being here today. In the Warsaw Ghetto, in unimaginable conditions, a young man, along with others, led by Emanuel Ringelblum, was part of the creation of an underground archive of life. The archive, known as the Oneg Shabbat, included diaries, official papers, wall posters, even sweet wrappers, and they buried them in the ground in milk churns. In 1942, one of the young men that I mentioned, David Graeber, who was just 20 years old, wrote his last will and testament. I would love to live to see the moment in which the great treasure will be dug up and shriek to the world proclaiming the truth, so the world may know all. But no, we shall never live to see it, and therefore do I write my last will. May the treasure fall into good hands. May it last into better times. May it alarm and alert the world to what happened and what was played out in the 20th century. We may now die in peace. We fulfilled our mission. May history attest for us. In September 1946, 10 metal boxes containing the many documents buried underground were uncovered. Today, I hope we're going some way towards fulfilling David's last wish, attesting for him and for the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were stripped of their citizenship, their dignity, their humanity, who were taken forced into ghettos and camps, who were murdered in forests and ravines and in purpose-built death camps. Today, many of those who somehow managed to survive relive their trauma so that the world will always know what happened, just as David wished. With the Holocaust Educational Trust, survivors travel the length and breadth of the country, sharing their testimony so that the next generation can bear witness. Every one of their stories is unique. And today, we will hear one of those unique stories from Joan Salter. Joan was born in Belgium in 1940. An absolute inspiration to everybody who hears her. Ladies and gentlemen, Joan Salter, MBE.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you all so much for being here today. I introduce you today to one ordinary family, my immediate family, and give you a condensed snapshot of the dehumanization and suffering we endured under the Nazis and the dangerous and traumatic journey they made to ensure our survival. And I will also go into the long climb back post-Holocaust to become ordinary people again. Now, my parents had lived most of their adult lives in Paris. My mother came from Warsaw, my father from Tarnów, which was a large town very close to Krakow. My mother was a widow with a young child when she married my father in 1938. Now, my father, when the happenings in Poland with the ghettos being set up in Warsaw and Tarnów, my father realized that the Nazis would come westward, and he thought Belgium would remain independent, neutral, and would not be occupied. So he moved us, sorry, I was not born yet, he moved my mother and sister and himself to neutral Belgium. I was born in February 1940, and I was 3 months old when the Nazis occupied in May the 10th. Now, initially, the Nazis were targeting the foreign Jews, in Maine, Jews of Polish and Russian origins. Now, my father was arrested very early on, initially put into a jail, and then he was deported on a normal, ordinary passenger train. Now, my father knew the train was going eastward, and he jumped from the train. The fellow Polish prisoners with him were horrified because the attitude at the time was, as long as we go, do what we're told, do a bit of, work, slave labor, it'll all be all right. We mustn't upset the things. Anyway, my father made his way back to Paris, and he hid in Paris with a cousin. Now, my mother's sister and I remained in Belgium for a little while until we were granted permission by the Belgian police. In all the Western countries, it was actually the police that acted as the agents for the Nazis in the rounding ups. Right. So my mother returned to Paris with us, and we did not live with my father because at that time they were not targeting women and children. So it was safer if we were separate, and we lived actually with a few of my aunts who were married to professionals and had French nationality. Okay, now then what happened? Things got worse. July 1942, my mother went for the weekly registration with the local police force in Paris. And through serendipity, she managed in the end to register with a kindly policeman, and he actually warned her that we were to be rounded up that weekend. This roundup was the first time women and children were targeted, and it was absolute horrific event. The mothers were separated from the children, and the children were initially sent to a camp called Drancy. In the end, 11,500 children, 16 and under, were deported to the death camps. Only a handful are known to have survived. Anyway, we were smuggled out of the occupied zone early in the morning, put into a laundry van, covered up, big basket, covered up with dirty laundry, and actually smuggled down into Vichy. We were lucky to be able to, for a short time, be reunited with my father, who had again nearly been rounded up in Paris during the 1941 roundup, and actually another ordinary person, the concierge of the apartment block, actually told the Nazis that that apartment was empty, and he also had been smuggled down into Vichy. Okay, he then was in a camp in Vichy. They were more easily to get out because the Vichy police did not actually want the hassle of using their resources to look after these people. And my father included, several were leased out to local farmers or local factories in return for Vichy being given payment. My father managed to escape with the help of some local people and escaped into Spain over the Pyrenees. Again, we didn't go together because it was a very hazardous journey. Now, my mother, my sister and I remained in Vichy until the Nazis were going to fully occupy it, and we managed also to be carried over the Pyrenees into Spain. We were captured at the border, but against the expectation that Franco would allow the Nazis in, it didn't happen. My mother and I were put in prison. We were illegal immigrants. My sister, who was older, was put in a convent. In the interim, my father had managed to get to Lisbon, which was a neutral country, get to the British, and was able to join the Polish Free Forces, which was part of the British Army. And in June 1943, he arrived in Britain as part of the armed forces. Right. Now, my mother, the Quakers were acting as the relief organization, and they came to my mother, and as I said, the expectation was that Spain would be occupied. The Americans had sent a relief ship, a neutral, the Serpa Pinto, flying under the Portuguese flag, and my sister and I, my mother gave us up. That is a picture of the little group of children who sailed on the Serpa Pinta in 1943. On that board are some of the documents showing exactly how difficult of the bureaucracy in America of even getting us to get to America. Anyway, we arrived in the States. My sister, who was ill, and they knew her father had died of tuberculosis, and she nearly wasn't allowed entrance until the welfare organizations put pressure. She was then in hospital for a year. I was in an orphanage, there's pictures there, and a family came along, and I was fostered. I was around 4 by this time, and my identity was changed, my language was changed, and my past was completely wiped out. I became Joan Farrell, and this was my family, and for the next 4 years I lived completely integrated into the American way of life. And then one day in 1947, I came home from school. My father, my American father, who was head surgeon at the local hospital, was home, which was very unusual, and he was crying. And he explained to me I had been adopted. The word meant nothing, and actually legally I had not been adopted. But the word meant nothing to me. This was my family, this was my home. And he explained that my parents had survived the war. No one used the word Holocaust. All I knew about the war was the day when I was in school and we were told the war in Europe was over, and of course the Americans had won the war and saved the world. And I had joined my little American school friends, waving my flag outside in the streets as the American troops marched by. So I told my American father not to worry, because it was all a big mistake. I would get on the plane, go to this country, England, and I would explain to these people, all a big mistake, I'm going back to my family in America. Well, didn't work like that. One thing, I've always been up for an adventure, and I thought, oh, I'm going on an airplane, which was a big, big deal in 1947. And I'll come back and I'll tell all my school friends. Well, it didn't work out like that. I ended up in Croydon Airport, which was the airport, terrified little girl, and met these two people who were completely broken and emotionally broken. My mother, every one of her 7 siblings and their children had been murdered. And for my mother, she'd given up this loving little girl and got back a confused, angry 7-year-old, and the older sister even angrier, because in America, just as happened to the Kinder here, there was a carelessness about which families they put us in. Okay, so the next 10 years, I actually traveled between my 2 families. It took decades before I was able to come to terms with who I am and create my own identity and become an ordinary person in control of my own destiny. The Holocaust is part of me, but it does not define me. In between that scared little girl arriving at Croydon Airport and today, I have had many opportunities and achievements. In life, we all have our crossroads moments. I was lucky in the people who guided me onto the right road, enabling me to achieve my potential. In 1949, I was granted British nationality. Up until then, I was registered as a displaced person with only temporary permission to remain here. I trained as a community worker in London and was then promoted to the role of Youth and Community Officer within the Inner London Education Authority. I have lived and worked in London the whole of my adult life. This is my safe place, my home. I married, have 2 grown-up daughters and 1 grandson. Aged 39, I graduated from the London School of Economics with a BSc Hons. It was not until the 80s that interest in Holocaust developed in the UK. I began to retrace my own history via many archives in the USA, France, Spain, Portugal, and especially the Foreign and Commonwealth Office archives in Kew, which tell a very different story to the attitude towards the children than the fairy tale that sometimes is told. I began to speak about my history in the 1980s. Over the next 20 years, I spoke to schools, universities, and organizations all over the UK, as well within the US and various countries in Europe, including Poland, and at a NATO base in Germany. I have worked with HET for over 20 years. I need my pension now, Karen. As well as working with other Holocaust organizations within the UK. I began writing not only on Holocaust subjects, but also as scriptwriter, and in the 1990s wrote an episode of the BBC's original drama series, All Creature, Great and Small. I don't think you can get more British than that. I was for a period the chair of the Child Survivors Association and co-edited We Remember, an anthology of the experiences of 31 of our members in their own words. In the late 1990s, I recognized my Polish-Jewish roots during the first of my visits to Poland. I traveled to the birthplace of my parents and the death places of my grandparents and the 40-plus members of their descendants murdered in the Holocaust. I and one cousin are the only remnants of this generation of our branch of the Zimmerbaum and Perlman families. At each place, I recited Kaddish for the souls of our large, extended families who had died in Tarnów, Warsaw, Belzec, and Treblinka. Age 76, I achieved a distinction from my research master in Holocaust and Genocide studies. In recent years, I have written and published a variety of academic papers and presented at an academic conference here in Poland and Greece. A paper I have written on the Jews of Tarnów in Poland is due to be published this spring. In 2018, I opened an official envelope marked OHMS, assuming it was my tax statement from the Inland Revenue. The words "you have been nominated for an MBE for services to Holocaust education" hit me in the eye. My thoughts went back to that frightened, traumatized little girl standing on the tarmac at Croydon Airport, and I thought of my parents as I realized that I was to be honored. My MBE was presented by the now King Charles III. I have traveled to all 7 continents, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, seen so many fantastic sights throughout the world. But for me, the most wonderful sight of all is standing on Waterloo Bridge with the view of St. Paul's Cathedral and the Houses of Parliament on my right. This city is my home. This country is my refuge. This king, my head of state. And these are what define me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan, for that very powerful testimony of how a ordinary young life suffered extraordinary circumstances to become an extraordinarily wonderful person. So thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us, and also reminds us of such an important work which the Holocaust Memorial Trust does. And thank you, Karen, for all the hard work that you do also. Now I would like to introduce Simran Simji and Jasraj Singh, 2 ambassadors who share their reflections and participating in the Holocaust Education Trust Lessons from Auschwitz project So can I ask Simran and Jasraj, please?
My name is Jasraj Singh, and this is Simran Singhji, and we are ambassadors for the Holocaust Educational Trust. We took part in the Trust lessons from Auschwitz projects as students from Guru Nanak Sea Academy in Hayes, October 2022. As part of our project, we heard from a Holocaust survivor, took part in a one-day visit to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and will be sharing what we have learned with our school. Even though we had been taught about the Holocaust in school and knew it was the murder of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, actually visiting the site of Auschwitz-Birkenau is something no textbook can teach. The entire experience of the visit left me feeling quite uneasy, but uneasy in a way that caused me to pause, consider, and recognize. What I recall most vividly is the barracks. Thousands of people were crammed into 3-tier beds. We cannot comprehend how claustrophobic and uncomfortable these conditions were. As part of the project, we were privileged to hear from a Holocaust survivor, Janine Weber, BEM. One part of her testimony that stuck with me was when Janine spoke about being forced to move into an area on the edge of her hometown in Lviv in Poland with only a small room for the entire family. Her parents were able to create a shelter under a wardrobe to protect Janine, her brother, and her mother from raids, but there was not enough room for the rest of her family, and they did not survive. Despite the anguish they endured, Holocaust survivors continue to teach us about the sharings of their life stories, their bravery, their insights, and their generosity of spirit to uphold human rights and strengthen our resolve to fight hatred in all its hideous forms. I think it is so important for young people to hear the testimony of Holocaust survivors. We must remember every individual, every life mattered, and every victim had their own stories, personalities, and identities. As ambassadors for the Holocaust Educational Trust, I will do whatever it takes to spread messages of both those who survived and those that were murdered, and raise awareness amongst my peers to ensure they are remembered.
For our Next Steps project, we decided to create a candle holder which will hold a lit candle. This will allow students from our school to commemorate and reflect, similarly to a candle lighting ceremony we took part in at the end of our visit to Auschwitz-Birkenau. We have also created a notice board about our visit and what we learnt. We'll be presenting assemblies to all secondary year groups at our school, and I've created a video blog. We wanted to reach out to students and the staff of our school community and pass on what we have learned about the Holocaust and the impact it had on so many lives, and how anti-Semitism is still something that occurs in society today. It is important that as young people, and especially as the Trust ambassadors, we continue to encourage our peers and the wider community to learn and remember the Holocaust. Survivors will not be able to share their stories forever. Therefore, it is important to continue to share their stories with future generations so that the Holocaust is never forgotten, denied, or distorted. The theme of Holocaust Memorial Day this year is Ordinary People. This theme encourages us to understand that the victims were just like us. They had their own dreams, hopes, and ambitions that were cruelly taken away from them. By studying the fate of those murdered in the Holocaust and their lives before they were victims, we help to ensure that they are not forgotten, and we're able to demonstrate that European societies were rich and diverse before the Second World War. We should all aim to remember these victims as who they were, as they were much more than just a number. Thank you to the Mayor of London and the General London Assembly for inviting us to be here today to share our experience and reflections on why Holocaust education is so important for young people.
Thank you, Simran and Jasraj. What they didn't know is that they are from my constituency. They attend the Guru Nanak Sikh Academy in Hayes, and I'm really pleased that they did take part in this educational visit and that they're sharing their experiences with their colleagues in school. And it just reminds us how important the Education Trust is, and I'm really pleased to have welcomed them, two constituents of mine, to City Hall. And now I would like to introduce Olivia Marks Waldman, OBE, Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust.
Thank you, Mayor of London. Thank you, Chair of the Assembly, and thank you to all the team working behind the scenes to make this event happen today. Friends, we are all, of course, born ordinary. Joan has shown us what an extraordinary impact one person can have. But despite us all being born ordinary, some of us become victims of ideologies that say our lives are worth less than others. Martin Stern was an ordinary little boy, aged 5 years old, from a Jewish family when he was taken out of his classroom and then later deported to camps just because he was from a Jewish family. No one is born an evil monster. Some people make choices that lead them to become perpetrators of genocide or bystanders to it. And people are not born as saints or born as heroes. Some make choices to resist, to challenge, or to rescue. Sir Nicholas Winton was just an ordinary stockbroker on holiday in Czechoslovakia when he realized what was happening and turned into a rescue mission for so many children. To a large extent, we can all choose how to behave or what to believe. We are all ordinary people today who can be extraordinary in our actions. We can all make choices to challenge prejudice, stand up to hatred, to speak out against identity-based persecution, to show responsibility. And this is what is happening at the many thousands of events taking place around the country that Holocaust Memorial Day Trust is supporting right now. As we join together to mark Holocaust Memorial Day 2023, let's aspire to be the kinds of ordinary people who do extraordinary things. In Rwanda in 1994, a genocide took place after years of propaganda and oppression and following decades of prejudice. Approximately 1 million Tutsis were murdered. Antoinette Mutabazi was an ordinary 11-year-old girl. She spent weeks hiding in the bush from killers who had brutally murdered most of her family. She survived a massacre in a church and crawled over dead bodies when the killing had stopped. After settling in the UK and building an ordinary life as a student chaplain, she has chosen to do something extraordinary. She relives her traumatic experiences so that ordinary people around the UK can learn about the dangers of prejudice and intolerance, including us here today. Friends, please welcome Antoinette Mutabazi.
Good morning, everyone. I feel a deep sense of responsibility as I stand before you on the most important day of the year, Holocaust Memorial Day. I stand here as a survivor of genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda, and I'm here to tell you that victims of genocide are ordinary people. My mother was murdered on my birthday during the genocide. She was an ordinary woman. My little brother was shot and died in my arms. He was an ordinary person. My father's sister, my auntie, was married a Hutu man who killed her when the genocide started. She was an ordinary person. As you can see, I'm an ordinary person. Do we have ordinary people in the audience today? I was just 11 years old when my childhood was turned upside down by the genocide. I was born and raised in Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda, a small country the size of Wales. Being the only girl among 4 siblings, it meant that I was spoiled by my father, who treated me like a little princess. Growing up, I wasn't aware of the tribal division that existed between Tutsis and Hutus. I was happy to know that I'm Rwandan, but that all changed one day at school when my primary school teacher asked me what tribe do I belong to. I suddenly became aware that the teachers were dividing us children into the groups based on our ethnicity. This made me very insecure. As a Tutsi, I was often called a cockroach. And in my country, no one likes cockroaches. When you see one, you crush it and kill it. For a while, I lost the desire of going to school. As I said, I was just 11 years old when genocide began in 1994. As some of you may know, it was triggered by the shot down of the plane of the president on the evening of the 6th April in 1994. That evening, my father told us that the day he feared the most had finally arrived. He told us to leave the house and hide, but each family member on their own to maximize the chance of at least being someone to survive. For 3 months, at the age of 11 years, I was terrified and hiding alone in the African bush. I lived like a wild animal, surviving on the rainwater and sweet potatoes that I dug in the farm nearby. During that time, many ordinary people, friends, neighbors, and even families turned to each other. One day, I was hiding in discussed toilet when I overheard the killers discussing who they have murdered, the women they have raped. You can imagine how I felt. I prayed and hoped that no one would think of checking the toilet. The stench of the toilet was not a worry at all. It was my hiding place for about 3 weeks. By the way, I wore the same clothes for 3 months. I saw things most people have only ever seen in Hollywood horror movies. I saw a child sucking from its dead mother. I didn't know what to do. I left that child. That image has never left me. To this day, I often wonder whether there was something I could have done. But remember, I was just only 11 years old. My little brother Emil was 6 years old when the grenade exploded in his head and his face changed. I held him in my arms as he was gasping the air and asking for water to drink. I had no option but to abandon his body and run to save my life. My youngest brother was 2 years old. He died together with 50 other toddlers when the killers discovered their hiding place and set it on fire. One day, being captured, I found myself in a queue of people being killed. As the queue got shorter and shorter, I was numb. I was ready to die. If you gave the killer money, they will shoot you. If you didn't have money, they will cut your head off. Friends, at the age of 11, I saw people's head being cut off and thrown into the ditch. But with just 3 people ahead in front of me, miracle happened. One of the killers brought the news that the bank in Kigali was broke into. The killer's attention turned into money, and they forgot about killing us. The same day, I saw the dogs eating the bodies of dead people. Up to this day, I'm terrified about the dogs. I often struggle to find the words to express the things I experienced as a child. But even when the killing stopped, the idea of dying was more appealing than living. Thankfully, I don't feel like that anymore. I'm thankful to the UK for giving me the opportunity to rebuild my life. And working with young people fills my heart with joy. I'm thankful for the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust for giving me this platform to educate people about the danger of prejudice. I'm thankful for you all for listening for me today. My dear friends, the duty to remember is for all of us all. It has to be passed down from generations to generations. Let us not be bystanders of injustice and prejudice. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today and to mark the Holocaust Memorial Day.
Thank you, Livia, for that very moving testimony you gave. And it does take extraordinary courage to share that with us this morning and to relive that in your mind. And that, we all value that, and it's a reminder to all of us how ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and that when we let prejudice and hatred go unchallenged, how things can happen again, and we must not just forget this has just happened in history, but we've got to be vigilant and on our guard in our lives even now. And we ordinary people can do extraordinary things to prevent that happening. So I want to thank Olivia and Antoinette for sharing your thoughts with us. And I want to call back now Simran and Jasraj to read the statement of commitment for the Holocaust Memorial Day.
The Statement of Commitment. We recognize that the Holocaust shook the foundations of modern civilization. Its unprecedented character and horror will always hold universal meaning.
We believe the Holocaust must have a permanent place in our nation's collective memory. We honor the survivors still with us and reaffirm our shared goals of mutual understanding and justice.
We must make sure that future generations understand the causes of the Holocaust and reflect upon its consequences. We vow to remember the victims of Nazi persecution and of all genocide.
We value the sacrifices of those who have risked their lives to protect or rescue victims, as a touchstone of human capacity for the good in the face of evil.
We recognize that humanity is still scarred by the belief that race, religion, disability, or sexuality may make some people's lives worth less than others. Genocide, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, and discrimination still continue. We have a shared responsibility to fight these evils.
We pledge to strengthen our efforts to promote education and research about the Holocaust and other genocides. We will do our utmost to make sure the lessons of such events are fully learned.
We will continue to encourage Holocaust remembrance by holding an annual UK Holocaust Memorial Day. We condemn the evils of prejudice, discrimination, and racism. We value a free, tolerant, and democratic society.
Thank you, Simran, and just right. And it's a statement that we all need to renew and commit ourselves to. And thank you very much to the Holocaust Memorial Trust for reminding us and to ensure that we all remember what happened and that we commit ourselves to this, to the memory of the Holocaust Day. I would like to invite now Rabbi Epstein and Rusbetzin Epstein to give their reflections, recite the memorial prayer, and light the memorial candle. And then there will be a minute's silence. Thank you.
Last Wednesday, together with 450 students, I had the incredible privilege of hearing survivor Manfred Goldberg speak at Edinburgh University. It was the 18th of January, 2023. The date is significant. The 18th of January, 2023 was Ziggy Schipper's 90th birthday. The 18th of January, 2023 was also the day Ziggy Schipper passed away. In Jewish tradition, the tzaddik, the righteous amongst us, the ones who pass away on their birthday, and Ziggy was righteous. He was someone who, like the other survivors, like Joan, like Antoinette, are willing to share the most painful experiences in their lives so we can learn and grow. Ziggy and Manfred met as boys at the age of 14 in a concentration camp. And then, in 1945, Manfred saved Ziggy's life in one of the most infamous of death marches. Ziggy and Manfred became lifelong friends. While Manfred shared his incredible and devastating story of loss and tragedy, the horrors he experienced, he opened up a perspective that I hadn't actually considered very deeply, something we don't discuss often enough when we talk about the Holocaust. In the darkness, there was light. We sometimes forget that what kept humanity on an even keel after one of the worst crimes ever committed was just that, humanity. Manfred and Ziggy formed a friendship that lasted a lifetime in the worst place on earth. They found God in each other in a place God had forsaken. Even in the darkest of moments, love and compassion shone through. For myself and the other educators on the Holocaust Educational Trust's Lessons from Auschwitz, this is what we endeavor to teach each and every student. The lesson that Manfred and Ziggy taught us, that even at our lowest, where there is no humanity, it is within our capacity, and it is our responsibility to show compassion, to find love, friendship, and hope.
To Joan and to Antoinette, God bless you both. I'm about to read or sing the memorial prayer. And the memorial prayer has various phrases within it. But the one that I want to pick up on before Ilana lights the candle is the phrase Vayitzro bitzro hachayim et nishmoteihem. May their souls be bound up in the bonds of everlasting life. Ordinary people, for whom our recalling of their names ensures that they are given everlasting life. May their memories be a blessing. El Male Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina B'mahalot Kedoshim Utehorim כזוהר רקיע מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות 6 מיליוני אחינו בני ישראל, אנשים, נשים, ילדים וילדות שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו, שנחנקו, שנטבעו ושנקברו חיים בידי הנאצים ועוזריהם יימח שמם וזכרם. באושוויץ, מיידנק, טרבלינקה, מאוטהאוזן ובשאר מחנות ההשמדה, ומסרו את נפשם על קדושת השם. בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם, לכן בעל הרחמים הסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר אמן. Yehi zichram baruch. May their memories be a blessing. Amen.
As we come to the end of the ceremony, I'm sure you will agree with me that the testimonies and words shared with us today have been both powerful and humbling, and will stay with us as we go about our daily lives this week and in the future. On behalf of the City Hall, I would like to extend our thanks to Joanne and Antoinette for joining us today and speaking so openly about your experiences, and to our Lessons from Auschwitz ambassadors for ensuring that the histories of the Holocaust continue to be told. And thank you, Rabbi and Robertson Epstein for your reflections and prayer. And our event partners, Livia Marks Waldman from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, and Karen Pollock from the Holocaust Educational Trust. Your kind and tireless cooperation has ensured that we continue to make this event happen every year. Our thanks also to the Jewish Music Institute for the contributions to our event today, and in particular to our talented musicians, Francesca Turgberg and Anna Lowenstein, on the cello and violin, who we will hear more from shortly. And finally, thank you all for coming together here today with hope that no one is subjected to the pain and suffering that genocide brings now or in the future. Shalom Hashem. Peace be with you. Thank you.